big topics, big ideas, and practical policy solutions. This is Leaders on the Frontier with your host, David Leese.
Well, hi, everybody. My name is David Leese, and I'm your proud host of Leaders on the Frontier, and it's August 28th, 2024, the year of our Lord. And we're so glad that you could join us, regardless where you're from around the world or in this country, Canada. We really appreciate the incredible feedback that people give us in terms of the many important topics and policy issues that we talk about on Leaders on the Frontier. And today is no exception. We're going to talk about a very important issue, a country, an amazing set of people of Venezuela. And you may recall that on July the 28th of this summer, just a few weeks ago, there was a national election in Venezuela. And the election results were stunning. We found out that Nicolas Maduro, surprise, surprise, the incumbent, was reelected over the opposition parties, the alliance there, led by Edmundo Gonzalez. And it was disheartening because there were so many indications and evidence that the election was a fraud. In fact, both opposition and international observers, including the Carter Center, called it neither free nor fair. So we're going to get into that topic, and there's a lot of background, and I think we'll find this very fascinating to all of us, regardless of what nation you are from, including Canada, because there are important lessons to be learned. So we are going to dare to peel the perennial onion as we talk about what is some of the history of Venezuela, what's going on there now, and what are the lessons learned, and who are the actors. And what does it mean for this country? Because there's very important lessons to be learned. And it all relates to the theme of good public policy, that if we believe in our nation, it's incumbent on us as citizens to be informed and to be active and not to take our liberty, our freedom for granted, whether that comes to a free and open press or whether it comes to any of our institutions. We really cannot take any of this for granted. So we're going to welcome everyone's questions as we go through this important discussion about Venezuela. And to kick things off, I want to share with you this background clip.
Protests erupted across Venezuela Monday, shortly after sitting President Nicolas Maduro was declared winner in a disputed election. Their results were met with doubt in Washington and beyond, and independent pollsters have called the official numbers implausible. In the Caracas neighborhood of El Valle and the city of Maracay, police fired tear gas while protesters blocked roads. A large statue of late President Hugo Chavez, a mentor to Maduro, was torn down in the city of Coro. And in the pro-government stronghold of Katia, there was a traditional cacerolazo protest, banging pots and pans.
I came to the street. We want freedom. We're tired of this government. We want to change. We want to be free in Venezuela. We want our families to return here. We don't want them to leave anymore. We want to be free with our families.
The United States in 2018 called Maduro's re-election at that time to be fraudulent. His most recent win cements his third term in office and extends the Socialist Party's 25-year rule. Throughout the years, Maduro has presided over an economic collapse, the migration of about a third of the population, and sanctions imposed by the U.S. The Venezuelan Electoral Authority said Maduro won 51% of the vote on Sunday, but independent pollsters say it was a decisive win for opposition candidate Edmundo Gonzalez. Gonzalez has repeatedly warned against bloodshed. However, on TV Monday morning, Maduro claimed paid agitators assaulted electoral agency officers.
We are familiar with this movie, and we know how to face these situations and how to defeat the violent.
Shortly after the results of Sunday's election were announced, opposition leader Maria Corina Machado said the opposition won 73.2% of the voting tallies. Maduro's rival, the former diplomat Gonzalez, spoke to an audience.
We have in our hands the tallies that demonstrate our categorical and mathematically irreversible victory.
The opposition's numbers are sharply different to the country's electoral commission. which called the election for Maduro with 51% of the vote. Machado called on supporters to gather in front of UN offices in Caracas on Tuesday, while Maduro's campaign manager has called on their supporters to march Tuesday as well. Venezuela's defense minister has warned against allowing a repeat of the, quote, terrible situations of 2014, 2017, and 2019. In those years, anti-government protesters took to the streets and hundreds were killed.
So there you have it. That's a clip from Reuters. And as you can see, the story is stunning, with a perceived electoral fraud amounting to millions of votes, as one side claimed 51% and the other verified at 73%. So with me here to talk about the story of Venezuela and where we're at today is the president of Ladies of Liberty Canada, Anna Rizo. Welcome, Anna.
Thank you so much, David, for inviting me to your show. It's an honor for me to be here and to be able to talk about the situation in my country.
Well, it's an honor to have you, Anna, and we're glad that you could join us because I want to start off with a question. So what's your take on the elections in Venezuela? Were they free and fair?
No, definitely not. And that's not only because of the fraud that we saw on July 28th, but actually the irregularities started to happen long before. One of the clear examples is that they banned Maria Corina Machado, who is like the true leader of the opposition in the end of the day, from running. She was originally the person who won the process that we call the primarias. The primarias is the process where the leader of the opposition gets elected by Venezuelans. Venezuelans voted for Maria Corina Machado, and this result was public. The government instead decided to ban her from running. Then she designated another person who was Corina Joris, and she was banned too by the government. And then they finally selected Edmundo González Urrutia, who is the person that was able to run and who effectively won on the last election.
Okay, this is a story that a lot of Canadians, we don't hear about, but this is the government, the tyranny involved, that's my word, it has systematically banned the opposition leaders. And as they've stepped aside, then finally it was Eduardo Gonzalez that was the last candidate standing. I mean, this is absurd, isn't it, Anna?
Yes, and even though this was a very difficult campaign, David. And when I mean difficult, is that in addition, they banned Maria Corina Machado and her team from flying. She wasn't able to take airplanes. Imagine that the government of Justin Trudeau come and tell Pierre Poilievre, oh, you cannot take a flight in Canada. You are banned from flying.
Mm-hmm.
So your campaign needs to be driving. Like, imagine how crazy would that sound? That's what Maria Corina needed to do. She was driving all across Venezuela, meeting everyone and going to these small locations and city alongside Edmundo to support him. So this was the reality of her campaign.
Okay, so and just so Canadians realize, there's been a lot of international organizations, I think, including the American Association of States as well, that called this out and said that this is really a violation of basic human rights. And so this is really quite absurd. And I think there's a very interesting story that I was certainly inspired by, and that is that the one of the key opposition leaders, Maria Corina Machado, organized literally thousands of citizens across Venezuela to, in essence, verify the election. Can you tell us about how that worked? Because I think that's a very inspiring story.
Well, it is very inspiring because what Maria Corina did was to create a long network of citizens, of civilians, and organize them in what she called comanditos. And what are these comanditos? They're basically communities organized in different towns and cities, including those remote and very rural towns that they barely get Wi-Fi. And they started to observe the elections. So in every voting center, people were very active, seeing what was going on. And you were able to collect, and this is established in the Venezuelan law, you have the right to take the electoral receipt as the proof of the result of your electoral
Right.
center. So what is the difference between this election and previous elections? That the citizens of this country were organized. They were collecting electoral receipt by electoral receipt in all these voting centers nationwide, and they were collecting this by state and sending the results in Caracas to the opposition office. So this is how they were able to provide, like, we actually won. This is the actual, like, electoral receipts. So what is Maduro talking about? Where are your electoral receipts, government? This is what the opposition has been asking since July 28th. And for nobody's surprise, the government hasn't shown any.
Okay, this is really an incredible story. This is not the first time this kind of scale of election fraud has been perpetrated by a tyrannical government. And so they anticipated that proactively with a strategy involving thousands of citizens, and even at some of risk. I mean, this is not for the faint of heart. So citizens can make a difference. So I think that truly is a great example of how citizens do make a difference here. So Anna, I want to, I'm really excited about our conversation today in terms of understanding more about this story about Venezuela. And I want you to help us understand that what it said in the clip is very interesting, that in Venezuela, I mean, you have, first of all, an incredible country. What is the population of Venezuela approximately?
It's about 28 million.
So 28 million, I recall well, decades ago, observing the economy of Venezuela. It's a very rich country, both in terms of natural assets and culture and history, but also in terms of energy. Is Venezuela, like you grew up in Venezuela, what was that like during that more prosperous period?
Well, in Venezuela, we consider oil like the main reason of our prosperity. For us Venezuelans, culturally, I believe this is a cultural matter. We're very pro energy, we're very pro oil. And for us, this was the reason why Venezuela in the past used to be the most prosperous country in Latin America. While you had people from Argentina running away from a dictatorship, or from Chile, they used to come to Venezuela because in Venezuela they will find a prosperous land to grow their family and to have a better future. So unfortunately, in my case, I was born in 1992 and Chavez was elected in 1998. Actually, as a matter of fact, the same year that I was born, Chavez tried to do a coup d'etat against the government, the elected government, using the military. And what I remember is that, of course, Venezuela was a third world country with problems. In the 90s, they already started to experience problems. One example is the Caracazo, which was a very, big protest that took place in Caracas. But overall, was still a very good place. What I saw growing up was unfortunately the decline. I saw people complaining about institutions getting very, taking over politically speaking, from the oil company, telecommunication, electricity. Everything started to become like part of the government in every sense of the word. And I saw TV channels being shut down, TV channels that have been running forever because Hugo Chavez got angry of criticism, so we're going to censor you. So we saw our media also declining. And the last attack, and the most horrible of all, I would say, was the attack against private property. We used to see Hugo Chavez pointing out at businesses on national TV saying, oh, I want to expropriate this business. I want to expropriate this business. And he would expropriate. He expropriated thousands of these businesses that were proactive and were productive in the country. And that also took us to the economic collapse that our country had, because what kind of economy are you going to have if you don't have production? So that's the reality of Venezuela.
So the story of Venezuela goes back many years now to the election of the so-called first socialist president, Hugo Chavez. And it's become a massive decline of that country. In fact, it's amazing in popular discussion now, politically, often Venezuela is referred to, like Argentina, as a kind of a warning, a case study of the dangers that socialism does not work. And it's hurt millions of people. In fact, one of the things that I wasn't quite aware of that did come out in that Reuters clip was that some one-third of the country has left the country. Can you help us understand what the heck happened there?
Socialism is what happened, if you want a short answer. But if you want the
Yes.
long answer, it was a decline, like you mentioned, that took years. It wasn't like Chavez took office and then immediately everything started to decline. No, it's a progress of 25 years. So, Noam Chomsky said once, like, oh, Chavez had the miracle of socialism. But the miracle was more like a nightmare, because what we started to experience when I left Venezuela, and this was the year 2016, I had to go to the supermarket multiple times to check if they had bread, if they had butter, if they had milk, because we started to see our supermarkets getting empty of basic products, empty of basic food. There was even a point in which they require your fingertips in a machine. They will scan your fingertips to make sure that you were not overbuying, because you can only buy one package of bread or one package of flour of one of anything, because you cannot have more options, or otherwise you were taking from your fellow citizens. So that's the reality of socialism. While in a free market economy, you have the bread waiting for you. In socialism, you had to wait up to many hours, an entire night, for the bread.
Well, it's hard to wrap our heads around that. But, I think you do a brilliant summation of that, Anna, that the country of Venezuela, one of the bright stars in Latin America, went to become a train wreck. What did you call it again? A nightmare. All a reflection of socialism. So I think that's a very powerful lesson. So one of the things that I am really intrigued about our discussion today is kind of understanding the story of Venezuela as it relates to understanding the pathway to tyranny, how these things never go well, and how the government rigged, really in this case, all the conditions for the election. I mean, they even forbid the opposition leaders from traveling. They also set the date for the election. Are there other things that they did to basically rig this election?
Well, I think like this process, like what you see right now, is just one tiny example of what they have been doing during years. Like the case of Maria Corina banning from running is not the only scenario that we had. We had previously political leaders of the opposition in jail who were taken on national TV and placed in jail, and they had to wait there during years. We had judges who decided to defy the order of Hugo Chavez being placed in prison where they faced torture. So we're talking about a country that lost institutionality and where the constitution wasn't respected at all. The only difference is that right now in this electoral process, Maria Corina organized these citizens, these volunteers, and they were able to collect proof of the fraud. That is the difference, that this time they have the evidence to say, oh, you know what, you actually lost, and we are showing this to the entire world. And they don't know how to answer to that, only that by oppressing people, because that's the only thing that they have. They don't have justice on their favor, for real. They don't have the law on their favor. All that they have is the guns on their favor. And that's what they are using.
Okay, wow. What a story. So there's a long history of this gradually getting worse and worse, kind of following this tyrannical playbook. But it's interesting that you mentioned that there were some judges, as an example, and many others who tried to stand up to this tyranny, but they were persecuted. They paid a heavy price. And so it's taken a lot of courage to get to the point where we're at today, where you actually have a whole massive network of civilians, and they have the receipts. So what role has courage placed in this whole situation? Did it take a while for people to realize what was going on in their incredible country and then finally realize we need to stand up to this?
Well, I think that, it's very different when they run out of money. I think that it was Margaret Thatcher who once said, like, socialism lasts as long as the money lasts, something like that, she said. And I think
Indeed.
that was the case of Venezuela. Many people in the past, they used to support Hugo Chavez or even Maduro because
Mhm.
they thought like, oh, the government is giving me handouts. Of course, the government was also the one making things difficult. But people are easier to be deceived when you are giving them things for free. So many of them were, oh, this is not that bad, blah, blah, blah. When things start to get really bad, like really bad, that they didn't receive any government handout, like they started to see that they couldn't feed their children, when they started to see
Mhm.
that we even ran out of gasoline. Imagine the country with the largest oil reserve in the world running out of gasoline. This is insanity. When they started to see their own family getting dismantled, because this is the most hurtful thing that they did. They destroyed families. Now, the Venezuelan family is basically someone that is having their son living somewhere, their daughter living somewhere, grandparents that have never seen their grandkids because it's impossible to be together in our country. And when they started seeing this reality, the average population was when they started to realize like we cannot continue this way. We need to do something to get rid of these people. The problem is that when you wait until that point, until that level of destruction, it's usually too late. We have seen that in the case of Cuba. We are seeing this in the case of Venezuela. We have seen that in the case of Nicaragua as well. And now, like by that point, what a lot of people can do is to flee.
Okay, I think that's a very incisive point. Too often, by the time life becomes unlivable, life becomes unbearable, and the pain is so great, people start rising up more, but it may be too late. So let's see as this story unfolds. So well said. So I want to understand a little bit more about these leaders, who they are. And I'm wondering if you recall George Orwell's famous book, Animal Farm, how many of the parties, the animals lived in terrible conditions. It was unlivable. But the select few ruled, in terms of the definition of tyranny, is that they ruled, the select elite ruled in their favor. They ruled for themselves, for their own benefit. So is that the case of Venezuela? Does Hugo Chavez and all the others, the other elites, do they live in luxury as the people starve?
Well, the daughter of Hugo Chavez is one of the wealthiest women from Venezuela. And this is a person that comes from, like her dad was someone who was born in poverty in a farm estate in Venezuela. And he became part of the military. He was trained with very Marxist ideas. So it was very interesting that Hugo Chavez on national TV will say things like, oh, being rich and being wealthy is bad while wearing a Rolex watch. Like that is very interesting because you're wearing something that only the wealthy can afford. And then we have the case of Nicolas Maduro, who is now the president, who used to be a union leader and a bus driver in the past. And they're supposed to stand for the poor, for the labor class and all that. And in reality, now we have a president that is, well, not even a president, that's a dictator, a tyrant, oppressing other people and just taking the money through corruption to
Mhm.
feed the closest one, his allies, because in the end of the day, it's like a serpent, but with multiple heads, what they are battling right now in Venezuela.
Isn't that fascinating? So typically the elite live for themselves and live high on the hog, as they say. So, but in this context, to be clear, they call themselves socialists, so they've nationalized much of the country, as you said. The media isn't really free and clear. It's a farce, the way they've hollowed out the institutions. But in this case, are a number of them real believers in socialism, or are they just thugs ruling for their own benefit? Is there an easy way to answer that question?
Well, I think they are true socialists because if we see through history, this is what socialism usually leads to. So they actually went by the handbook, if you think about it, of the socialist leader who took the power, who centralized the economy, who took over the means of production of the country just to make themselves wealthy and their closer ones. Like, in my opinion, that's a real socialist because real socialism in practice, this is how it ends up looking like. Like, we have seen plenty of examples of that through history. And that's really what it comes down to power and control. And that's what they don't want to leave. At this point, they have been offered amnesty to certain members of the government. Because in the Americas, this is a crisis right now. And still, they don't want to leave because they have so many crimes against humanity that is very likely that it's like it goes from top to bottom. Sure, the ones on top are getting amnesty, but what about the ones on the bottom, you know? So it's an entire infrastructure of crime at this point. So they don't want to leave. They want to keep power and control.
Yeah, no, I again, and I think you're right on, is that, I mean, if we look at history, in fact, one of our listeners just said, if we ignore history, we're doomed to repeat it. And that's what's happening here, and people need to rise up accordingly. But this is the story of history. We look at all these tyrannies, whether it's Romania, whether it's the DDR or former East Germany. I mean, there's so many of them I could go through in great detail that show how socialism is really enables an elite thuggery class to take control and to govern for themselves, and really use socialism as a pretext to do all kinds of horrible things that really hurt the people. So I'm talking with the president of Ladies of Liberty Canada, Anna Rizo, and we certainly appreciate your questions and your comments. So one of I mean, there's so much to cover off here, but I guess part of the question coming off of this election in July, I mean, this is a very historic time. Is your sense, Anna, that across Venezuela, that Venezuelans are aware that they've basically been robbed yet again when it comes to this election?
Oh, yes. Look, everyone in Venezuela, that's why they have been in the streets for the last following days. That's why they went to protest immediately after the results, because it was so evident this time. It was so obvious. Look, before they issue the electoral results on national TV, people were already sharing information on social media and WhatsApp group chats about the different results on different electoral centers. So even before the electoral national council provided the results, people knew the tendency. They knew, oh, they won in this state, Edmundo. Like the results of that is that Maduro didn't win in one single state. He didn't win in any state of Venezuela. So people were already getting preliminary results. And then all of a sudden, these people came, then sit down and said, oh, Maduro won by 51%. That doesn't make sense. It's just saying the results that they created in their head, no backup, nothing to prove what they stated. And then it's like, oh, you need to deal with this because this is what we said and we are government. And it reminds me a quote by Stalin that said, it doesn't matter who votes, what matters is who counts the votes. And that's literally what they apply in this situation.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. So this is a very dangerous situation now, because it strikes me that the people of Venezuela knows that this election has been fraudulent. They know that their socialist policies are not working. Life is unlivable in poor Venezuela. And we're in a situation where we're at that kind of tipping point, I think, and you help me if I'm wrong, Anna, but for any government to carry on, they need the consent of the governed. They can't just simply rule when you have most of the population not consenting or supporting the legitimacy of this regime. So are we at this point where things could kind of fall apart and devolve into a civil war, where truly there's an armed conflict? And this is difficult because we don't quite know where the military stands, do we?
Well, the military, they are different. There's nothing clear on this. There are rumors, speculation. Like, we certainly don't know where the military is standing. Right now, a lot of the terror executed by the Maduro regime has been actually done through counterintelligence more than the actual military. So the actual militaries, there are certain rumors that some of them are actually not happy with what is going on. And the problem right now is that even if you have part of the military that decides to not follow Maduro, like, you are on their target of facing, well, brutality in worse scale that you can imagine. If political prisoners are having a bad time, if you're a member of the military and the government find out that you're a traitor to them, you're going to face the worst type of torture. So these are people that even to stand up and to become dissidents is super dangerous. But what happened with the government and how we make it to this point is because the government knew that the only way to keep real control was through the military. So in that sense, you need to have a stronghold of the military. So imagine the level of overseeing and like, they need to make sure that every member is under control of the government. They cannot allow to have something to what like Hugo Chavez did in the 90s, like a coup d'etat that was made by a fragment of the military. No, they cannot allow that because they know that the moment they allow them, it's over for them. So they are prioritizing control in the military.
So this is a very complex, unclear situation. And so our prayer is that things will be peaceful, but there will be a transition. So we'll get to that in a moment then, trying to look ahead here. But this has got terrible hardship on the people. It's not just about food, it's about their freedom. Are there people being murdered now in Venezuela by the regime?
Yes, actually, we have about 24 people that were killed in the protests. Some of them were as young as 14 years old, who have seen nothing other than this regime. Like, they were born into socialism, they die fighting for a better Venezuela, which is absolutely heartbreaking. And as we talk, like, there are about 2,000 political prisoners right now in Venezuela. And this was a crackdown and a witch hunt that the government started, and it hasn't stopped. Just yesterday, they kidnapped another close member of Maria Corina Machado's team. And this is a process that they have done during all these past 3 weeks. So it's a persecution and totalitarianism in every sense of the word.
Horrible. So this is heartbreaking news. There are many deaths involving civilians. And there's political prisoners. Do you have a sense of the scale of operation that the government is pursuing, the regime, to lock up their political opponents? And can you give us an example?
An example is that you can post, and I know this because I know personal cases of people who literally posted on Twitter against the government, and they were hunted down just because of a tweet. If they detain you in the street and they believe, like, for some reason you're a member of the opposition, and they check on your phone and you have what they call subversive material, you can be sent to prison. You become a political prisoner.
No kidding.
Like, the level of persecution is like that. The level of persecution is so high that I have a cousin who had a panic attack because she couldn't even say anything. And she was begging my family abroad, please continue talking about Venezuela because we can't. They will track us down. They will persecute us. Like, the persecution is brutal. One of the clear examples is one of my colleagues from the Ladies of Liberty Alliance in Venezuela. She is the chief of the party for her state on behalf of Maria Corina Machado, on behalf of the opposition, and she was arrested for a video that she did on Instagram denouncing what Maduro called Operation Tuntun, that is Operation Knock Knock. They knock on your door, they enter your house, and they take you, and they don't need any warrant, no judicial order. That's it. You're kidnapped by the government. And in the same day, she made that video, which went viral in the country. She became a victim of the same operation.
Okay,
So
so
this is the
this
magnitude.
this is very significant. This regime is persecuting its political opponents just because you disagree, and they're locking them up, making their life difficult, going after them with the law, the courts, the police, everything. And so why is it important that Canadians should learn about this, so that get the word out about these political prisoners? Why is that helpful?
Well, I think that one of the clear examples that we could use in Canada was during the Emergency Act that Justin Trudeau issued back during the trucker protests. Like when you allow the government to take arbitrary decisions like this, to use even cases like in the case of what Justin Trudeau did, that wasn't justified, like
Mhm.
you are giving government power to persecute you in the end of the day.
Mhm.
You're giving the government the power to execute violence. And let's remember that government, since they are the ones who keep most of the guns, they are the ones with the monopoly of violence in our countries. So we need to be very aware of what these type of decisions can lead to in the long term. Because if we turn a blind eye, if we go willful blindness over this situation, what can happen in the future? This creates a precedent. If he was able to do it back then, why he wouldn't do it again, for example? Like, who will stop him? So
Yeah.
in this kind of situation, we need to be very aware. And as I think it was Thomas Jefferson, the one who said, like, the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. And I agree with that. And that responsibility is on us as civilians. We need to keep our government accountable.
I would vote for you, Anna. We need to keep our governments accountable. We need informed citizens about what's going on in this country. So when it comes to our audience, please share the word. This is going to be recorded. Get the word out, because Venezuela is truly a case study in terms of how we can't take freedom and liberty for granted. So, it truly is really quite a remarkable story. So I do want to talk a little bit about how things have unfolded in Venezuela so we can learn from this incredible story. This relates to institutions as well. And you've alluded to this a little bit. Like, we've talked a little bit about the impact of these crazy policies in this regime on individuals. Let's talk about institutions, because there's a kind of a playbook. And it's interesting. One of the things I want to share with the audience is that, as you may know, I'm certainly a fan of history and learning. And I always think of Aristotle's famous book on politics. And I don't know if you recall that, but on Politics by Aristotle, he reflected intimately about tyranny because he experienced this during a terrible age of Athens when it was under tyrannical rule. And I think what I find here is that there's an example here where there were no checks on powerful people for their personal gain. The leaders are mean. That's a common story here in Venezuela. These are mean people, to put it politely. You could call them other names, but I'll resist doing that publicly. But these are not nice people, and they steal from the hardworking people, but they rig elections and they rule for themselves. And so the question I have is, how did they change the courts and institutions? Did they change the schools to their will? Like, can you go through that a little bit, Anna, to give us a glimpse of how they went after those institutions?
Well, one of the first things is that they focus on education in the sense that they will create even their own schools or their own missions, as they call them. So they
Mm.
had three different type of missions. One focused on elementary school, high school, university, and they said like, oh, this is to provide information and education to the vulnerable ones, because that's the language. Language matters. They will always say that they're doing this for the greater good, for the people who needs it the most, for the
Ah.
vulnerable ones. That's how they start, right? Because
This
they want to
sounds
sound
familiar, doesn't it,
empathetic.
Anna? We're doing this for your good. We're
Exactly. We're doing
we're
this
we're
for your
helping the
good.
oppressed.
Exactly. We're helping those that are oppressed by the oppressors. It's the same Marxist language when you think about it. So they start with that. And when you see a lot of things that these people were learning in these educational institutions, was like the thoughts of Che Guevara, or the economic thinking of Hugo Chavez. So it was like more like indoctrination. Like, I'm a lawyer from Venezuela. That's my original career. And I remember that one of the universities in my state, I had to move to a different state because the school of law was taken by people who were alienated with the government. And one of the things I learned is that they are not teaching Roman law anymore, even though the Romans created one of the first written laws in the world. And
Indeed.
it's a clear foundation for those that decide to study law. And they decided to, no, we are not going to teach Roman law because that's imperialistic. So now we're not teaching Roman law, we're teaching something else instead that is more aligned with their, socialist mentality agenda. I don't know.
Mhm.
But this is a clear example of how they manipulate education. And this is why we need to focus a lot when it comes to education, even here in Canada, because we're seeing that tendency with our universities here too.
Mhm.
We're seeing how our universities, like, most of people are start to think more to the left. And why is that? They are learning that somewhere. So critical thinking and having a good education system is a priority. And for those who want to change things and who want to grab power, as you mentioned, taking over education is one of the first things to do. So
Okay.
that's one of the
So
examples.
so that's a key point of their playbook. The tyrannical rulers, the Marxists, they always go after the schools. They always go after your kids' education. They want you to think the way they do, all of the thought police. So, was there a lot of, well, I mean, you have a legal background, Anna, which is terrific. Could you get a fair trial in Venezuela today then?
It's very hard. That's why I left. Like, I was naive, I think, when I started to study law, because I believe, by the time I graduate, my country might be different. We might have a different government. The reality is that that's not what happened. So the judicial system in Venezuela is a joke. Like, there's no separation of power in Venezuela. The judicial
Okay.
system is under the government. The electoral system is under the government. The different ministries, of course, are aligned to the Chavismo as well. Even the assembly, like, there's no separation of power in Venezuela, because that's what totalitarianism is at the end of the day.
Mhm. I understand that at the Supreme Court level, they significantly redefined the court. They made it much larger. They put in their political lackeys who were beholden to the regime. And there have been thousands of decisions by the Supreme Court, and I believe there's only one that was against the government. Is that your understanding as well? I mean, it's become so absurdly lopsided. There's no checks on the power of the regime.
There's no check. There's no one to check on the government. And, in the end of the day, as I mentioned, they are the ones keeping most of the guns. They are the ones keeping most of the firearms. The structure of power is for them. Something that is important to emphasize in Venezuela is that in 2013, they approved a law that is called a ley desarme. That means, like, oh, disarm. Like, we're gonna take guns, illegal guns, legal guns as well. We're gonna make everything more strict. So the government was the one controlling most of guns in Venezuela, because they believe that this is the way to fight criminality. They thought,
Oh,
oh, this is how, Venezuela is too dangerous right now, and this is the year 2013. So we are gonna approve this law because that way we're gonna fight criminality. let me tell you, they didn't fight criminality at all. Actually, Venezuela started to experience craziest level of high crime that you can imagine. And that's one of the reasons why many people had to leave as well. In Venezuela, they can kill you for your phone in the street, literally, something as simple as that. And now people don't have guns, most of civilians, and the one who has the gun is the one who holds the power. So there is that as well.
My gosh. As Prairie says on the chat here, disarm the people. It is unbelievable, the familiarity of these playbooks. And just a point of a kind of a trivia question. So what is the name of the secret police in Venezuela?
The name is SEBIN. That's the abbreviation as well. Yes. And they are counterintelligence, and yeah, like they can manipulate many things. They check on your Instagram, they check on social media. Actually, as a matter of fact, in the moment you're entering the country, they will ask for your ID, and they will go to like a small office in the airport before you board the airplane, and they will be like checking if you have a clearance, if you're good to go. Like they did that to me last December. Fortunately, they didn't find anything. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here talking to you. But right now, for example, I cannot go to Venezuela because if they found what I've been saying lately, I am a target.
Boy, that would be very difficult, Anna, for you and your family, and for others in your situation. It would be very, very, very disheartening. I can't imagine. So in that context, Anna, I know a little bit about your story. I understand you came from more of a middle class background, and it seems to me that again is part of the pattern of a lot of tyrannical regimes. Is they really, in essence, get rid of the middle class. They undermine it. They undermine their ability to freely make money and to be able to keep it because taxes are so high. The cost of living goes through the roof, as we've seen in Venezuela. They even have this absurd notion of price controls, a la, what's her name again, Kamala Harris and the U.S. government. I mean, it's just absurd. I mean, how crazy that idea is from an economic point of view, because it doesn't work. Is that, though, part of the point, is they don't want to have a middle class? Because the middle class has often been the parties, the group of people in our society that get involved in politics. They have the time, the money, the ability to volunteer, help build society, and also be involved in politics. So do you think that's part of their playbook as well here?
Well, I mean, when it comes to my personal family, I come from a middle class background, but it's because my parents worked really hard. Like my family was actually of very humble origins. I come from the rural part of Venezuela, and my dad was born an orphan. My mom was born also into a poor family.
Wow.
They were born into a different Venezuela where you could escalate through education and through working hard. That right now is basically impossible in Venezuela. So that's what they destroyed, a country that actually allowed social mobility. That's what helped my family in the past. So right now, as you mentioned, the middle class is the first one that suffers because it's the first one that finds in that line where you don't have enough money to start all over again in a new country like Panama, for example, where many wealthy Venezuelans move to, or, Miami. No, you are not that wealthy to do that. And then, like the poor people, they still, can succeed as long as they get handouts. But eventually, socialism catch up to them as well. So, sure, the middle class is the one that suffered first, is what we saw in Venezuela. People ran away because of what you mentioned. They saw the quality of living declining so bad. Like, it didn't matter if I was working as a lawyer, my salary was approximately $30 per month. So
$30 a month.
A month. Wow. That's correct. So when you work really hard in your life, you get, good education and you try to do well, and this is what you get in exchange, it's a sign that you need to leave. And if on top of that, you become easy target of criminality, then there's a bigger sign. Like the year that I moved to Canada, I was assaulted at gunpoint. I thought that I could lose my life because someone wanted my handbag. Like that was the situation that I found myself in. And I remember that I was a realization, like, I don't think my life is worthy an iPhone. Like, I think my life worth more than this. I need to leave this country. So that
Wow.
was part of the reality. And then when everything went from bad to worse, that people couldn't afford to eat, look, I heard the most horrible stories that you can imagine. Mothers who wanted to kill themselves because they couldn't feed their kids. Like, that was the harsh reality. Then even the poor people started to live massively. And that's when the refugee crisis sparked in Venezuela, and it was non-stop influx of people, thousands per day crossing the Venezuelan Colombian border because they were desperate. They were hungry.
Wow, what a heartbreaking story again. Is it true that Venezuela is systematically emptying its prisons so that they can migrate into countries with open borders like the United States?
Well, Venezuela is right now, if I'm not wrong, Venezuelans are the largest number of refugees entering through the US border. Like, Venezuelans go all the way walking, or facing criminal gangs, because that's the unfortunate reality in Central America and Mexico as well. And they cross the Darien Gap between Colombia and Panama in massive numbers just to make it to the US. And if it's not to the US, it's to South America. So what we have right now is a regional crisis that, if the Maduro regime continues this tendency that we're seeing, is only going to get worse. And people in Canada, some of them might think like, oh, why would I care if we live in, very up north, and, in Canada, this doesn't matter. Well, most of refugees that were sent by the mayor from New York City were actually Venezuelans, and they were sent to the border in Quebec. So the New York Quebec border, that's where they send
Very
them.
interesting. So I just want to clarify that for our audience. You may not be aware of this, but the Canadian government has enabled a gap in our border. I believe it's just south of Montreal for years now, where migrants could freely go in and out of the across that border into Canada. So you're saying that was certainly one of the doors that they used to come into this country as well.
Yeah, and even my friends in Montreal, other Venezuelan friends that immigrated years ago, they told me like, wow, can you believe that I found a Venezuelan guy asking me in my job if they were hiring illegal people like that? Like, this is part of what will become a problem for Canada as well, because a lot of these people are not going to stay in the US. A lot of them will continue up here. So we need to support in every way that we can a change of government in Venezuela, because let me tell you, no immigrant wants to stay living in poverty in another country.
Of course.
Most of Venezuelans, they want to go back. For them, this is a hope. But how are you going to go back to a place with this level of persecution? That's insanity.
It really is. So, Anna, just to put you on the spot, there's a party named Iggy on the chat who says that 2.7 million Venezuelans are currently inside the U.S. I'm not sure if that's entirely accurate, but it sounds like a plausible figure. Do you know how many Venezuelans are in Canada?
I don't have the Canadian number. I know that in the case of Canada is drastically lower, because most of Venezuelans in Canada, unfortunately, we have entered legally. Some of them on the refugee status, some of them as international students, some of them as foreign workers that arrived many years ago. And that's the way it has been in the case of Canada. But I know that in the US, that number is quite believable, because I have even friends in California that they have told me they live in San Diego, border with Mexico. And they told me it's insane to see the amount of immigrants, illegal immigrants, from the centers, the immigration centers, many of them are sleeping in the street because they don't have capacity. They don't have capacity to get out these people.
No, it's a highly dysfunctional situation. So I did want to turn to you, Anna, your story, in the sense that, in true Venezuelan fashion, you've rolled up your sleeves and you've tried to figure out with your colleagues and friends, and you've created an organization called Ladies of Liberty Canada. Can you tell us more about what that is, and what is your mission?
Well, the reason why I started this organization is because I realized that, like, first of all, we're chapter based. So I just started the chapter here in Canada, but we are in more than 43 countries now. Our latest chapter was
43
yes,
countries.
our latest chapters are the one in New Zealand and Australia, actually.
That's
So we have
incredible.
been, yes. So one of the reasons why I decided to do it is because I'm passionate over politics, but I'm also passionate over ideas. And one tendency that I realize is that in the case of females, we don't have a space where we can talk about the issues that affect women, and while at the same time keeping a more conservative or libertarian leaning mentality. Many feminist organizations, especially in Canada, are left wing leaning. That is not a secret for anyone. And unfortunately, if you come with the ideas that are more about, individual freedom, free market economics, or simply saying, like, I don't support socialism, many of these women will probably disagree with you or find, like, oh, maybe you are supporting the patriarchy or something like that. So I wanted to have an organization where women can feel comfortable to talk about issues that concern them and also express their political ideas without retaliation. And that's why we have now chapters in Ottawa, in Toronto, and in Calgary, and probably we're going to open one in Vancouver soon. So we're very excited about expanding and, bringing this voice from Canadian women. We also want to elevate their voices so if they want to run in politics, if they want to run in parliament, support them as an organization as well. We want to support women with the good ideas.
Wow, sounds like a dynamic, exciting organization. So how can they find out more about Ladies of Liberty?
They can check our website, ladiesofliberty.org, and they can follow us on our Instagram account as well in Lola Canada. And they're going to see and keep informed of the different activities that will take place. And they can also contact us directly through our website if they want to either join a chapter or start their new chapter in their cities. We're always open to starting new chapters.
Well, that sounds like a great vision. And I love the idea that you're challenging all of us to roll up our sleeves and get involved, to become better informed citizens, and not to just simply sit on the couch, but to be involved and to actually work for liberty, not just here in Canada, but across the world, including in Venezuela. So I'm talking with the president of Ladies of Liberty of Canada, Anna Rizo, and we're having a very dynamic conversation with Anna as well as our audience. We've got so many comments, and I'm very appreciative of your involvement and that kind of encouragement. And it's really important. People have so much to offer if they choose to get involved, and instead of, dare I say, spending that time watching another yet again Netflix movie, why not get involved in our society, including in organizations like Ladies of Liberty? So let's turn back to Venezuela a little bit. We've talked a lot about the impact of the situation, this tyrannical regime, on individuals and their freedom and their lives, but also institutions and how they were changed to simply, in essence, take control over every aspect of Venezuelan life. And so one of the questions I have is, where could this situation, this story unfold? I know that from studying so many tyrannical regimes, we have a lot of scenarios. We have, a situation where there could be divisions within the regime itself. There could be a civil uprising as the consent of the governed simply falls apart. You could have international actors play a role in this as well. Where do you think this is going to unfold? Would this regime ever gracefully resign and say, hey, look, we're seeing that there's millions of people on the street. We don't have a mandate to govern, as much as we want to make it up and fudge the numbers on elections. I mean, fudging is too polite a word. Where do you think this story is going to unfold, Anna? Any guesses?
I think there are three possible scenarios here. One of them is that, as you mentioned, people start flooding the streets so much that there is a point that the military will say, like, we are getting tired. So, like, we are getting tired, but at the same time, like, we cannot provide for you safety anymore. That is the scenario that, for example, happened in Bangladesh recently. That there was a
Mm.
point that they simply say, like, we're tired. These people are not giving up. They're in the streets all the time. And something that
Mhm.
is important is that many military members in Venezuela also have been attacked by civilians. Like, the moment you like put your guard down, people are so angry that they can lynch you in the streets. So the moment the military guy goes to oppress people, he's also risking his life. And this is something that people are not realizing. So there could be a breach over there. Another scenario is that, as you know, in Latin America, it's not uncommon to see the a creation of guerrillas or paramilitarism. That's a clear example in places like Colombia or Nicaragua.
Mhm.
And, this will be a very terrible scenario as well in the long term, because if we started to have guerrillas created in Venezuela, this could lead to an armed conflict that can last for the next decades, like what is going on in Colombia, for example. That is another reality. And the other reality that I find would be the most terrible one, in my opinion, is that Maduro just stays in power and then we end up like Cuba with a dictatorship that has lasted more than 60 years. And unfortunately, that will be like, I think that at this point and at the rate we goes, that could be a very likely scenario right now. And if that happens, well, as I mentioned, the influx of immigrants will continue, refugees will continue, and just Maduro in power.
Okay, so we'll stay tuned to this story. And on that note, we're getting into kind of the last part of our discussion with you, Anna. I think one of the points I want to make here is that this story matters to Canadians and it has an international context. And just a point of background, it seems to me that Venezuela, and there's been, I think, some pretty good research on this, is an unusual country in the sense that it's this tyrannical regime, but that is really become a platform for other international players. And we have the usual suspects, whether it's the Chinese Communist Party, whether it's Russia itself as an arms supplier, whether it's Brazil in some form, and Iran, of all things. And we have this unusual set of facts where we have some 300,000 Venezuelans in Syria. So there's a lot of connections with other, frankly, nefarious actors that almost run kind of a parallel system of their own design to the West. Does that hold any truth? Anna, can you help us put into perspective how these kind of BRIC players are acting? BRIC stands as the acronym for that cluster of countries I just mentioned,
Yeah.
with the exception of India, of course, are playing a role in this crazy train wreck, which is called Venezuela.
Well, you forgot one of the most important players, that is Cuba. Like, Cuba is probably the country with the largest influence in Venezuela. And for no one is a secret that Venezuela has supplied thousands and thousands of barrels of oil to Cuba for free. And in exchange,
Cuba.
in exchange, we just get a counterintelligence. So that's why for any Cuban that is following the Venezuelan situation, they tell like this is the same thing that they apply to us. So we have other international players that is these horrible regimes and governments that you mentioned, like China, Russia, Iran. They have provided a lot of diplomatic support to the Chavismo, but also a lot of support in other aspects. Iran was the one sending gasoline in some occasions to Venezuela, which doesn't make sense because we have enough oil, but now we are in that situation that we need to rely on Iran. So it's a very terrible
Sorry,
situation.
can you repeat that for a second, Anna? You're saying that Venezuela, this incredible energy superpower of sorts, is importing gasoline from Iran?
Yes, that's correct.
Because they don't have the wherewithal, parts, and engineering know-how because so many people have left, or under
No,
socialism they can't refine their own oil products? This is
well,
bizarre.
basically because they destroy the refineries in Venezuela. Back in the day, Venezuela used to have some of the most modern refineries in the world. And what they did was that, the government, what they take, they destroy it. They basically took the refineries, they just used that money through corruption to also push for their political agenda. They didn't know what to really do with these refineries. They put people in charge not because they knew about oil or energy,
Mhm.
but because of political alliance and
Ah,
convenience. So
okay.
after many years, many of these refineries are just in terrible conditions. The production of oil in
Mhm.
Venezuela went like I don't have the numbers right now, but the disparity is big. Venezuela doesn't produce the amount of oil that we require even to
Yeah,
sustain ourselves.
right.
So now
Yeah,
Mhm.
sorry, Anna. But this is the pattern. This is the playbook. They get in charge, the tyranny, they run the show for this elite. They run the country down in so many ways. And these incredible economic diamonds, namely, oil refineries, are run, but they're run by twits, political appointees, pardon my language, instead of people based on merit who are capable. They run it down because it goes first to loyalty to the regime. That's how they run it. So, not a surprise. And in fact, as a sub point, it's interesting, and not to put you in the spot, but does Canada still import oil from Venezuela?
No, Canada
No, we
doesn't
don't.
import oil from Venezuela, but we
Okay.
import oil from terrible people as well, like Qatar.
No kidding. Yeah, we sure do. So that's, again, another related topic in this incredible country, Canada, where we have one of the first regimes of oil and gas. The industry is second to none. That we're even importing oil to this country is just, anyways, it's outrageous. So this is the situation, though. We have the usual suspects, including Cuba at the center of it, and other regimes all over Venezuela as a platform. So this is a hemispheric issue of influence. This is not just about the Venezuelan people. There's an international interest in trying to bring the situation around and frankly condemning what's happened in terms of fraudulent elections, because this matters to Canadians as well, doesn't it? Is the stability of the entire regime. Is that correct?
Yes, no, absolutely. Like in the end of the day, as I mentioned, it's a problem for the Americas. From Alaska to Argentina, like this is a serious problem on the Western Hemisphere of our continent because in the end of the day, what you mentioned is true with Iran and Russia, but you're forgetting the fact that Venezuela has links to Hezbollah, that they also finance terrorism in the Middle East. Like there was a finding that the Venezuelan government was selling Venezuelan passports in the Middle East to bring people. So you get someone with, I don't know, the name of, uh, put any Middle Eastern name, a person that doesn't speak any Spanish, and just got a Venezuelan passport out of nowhere because the government is selling the passports. So you are bringing people that could be even linked to terrorism to this continent in the end of the day.
Gosh. So this is truly, to use an articulate phrase, a rat's nest when we've got the usual suspects all over Venezuela. So when we're talking about this nasty crew, why don't we talk a little bit about the narcos? Are the drug traffickers all over Venezuela working in cahoots with this regime as well?
Absolutely. Actually, the Venezuelan regime is very involved. And this is something that I mention all the time. Most of the money in Venezuela right now doesn't come from oil, it comes from drugs. So,
Drugs.
yes, Venezuela, through the port of La Guaira, is one of the main points that drug traffickers use to export drugs to Europe and Africa. So, what we are seeing is a pattern that they basically created routes for drug lords to use, and they use it openly as they want. Actually, for no one is a secret that in the city of Maracaibo, El Cartel de Sinaloa operates. So these are Mexican cartels operating in Venezuela under the impunity of the government. And the same happens with Colombian cartels. So they are, since they do whatever they want, for no one is a secret that they are engaged in this type of criminal activities. What we have in Venezuela, and I always say this, is not a government, it's a criminal organization ruling a country.
Okay, so there you heard it from the president of the Ladies of Liberty. The crux of the matter is we have a tyrannical regime in power in Venezuela, and they are criminals. And if you can't figure this out, just open your eyes and you see the network of interests involved, both on the economic front, criminal activity, including human trafficking, all into the rest of the hemisphere, including the United States and Canada. So this is an incredible conversation, and I just encourage people to pass the word, because it sounds like Canada. Then it begs the question: what are we doing to fight this? Is our country weighing in at the federal level, saying this has got to stop, and we've got to get other countries involved? I mean, I think Brazil is still wavering on the fence, or what are they doing in terms of the, like the point is we've got to mobilize an international network, a team, if you will, to condemn this election and this regime, right? We've got to isolate them. Isn't that part of the answer here, Anna? What should we be doing in Canada to call this out? And where are we at this with the Trudeau administration?
Well, the Trudeau administration has said things like, oh, the results are very, we don't trust the results of the elections, but everything has been very mild, if you ask me.
Mild.
Yes. The answer of the Trudeau government has been very mild. And he said that he's in conversation with Lula da Silva. Lula da Silva is the same guy who was a friend of Hugo Chavez and who has been very close to the Maduro regime, that is the Brazilian president, a guy that was involved in one of the worst corruption scandals of Latin America, that was Odebrecht. So this is Justin Trudeau deciding to talk about the Venezuelan situation with a guy that is a criminal. So it's again like, this doesn't make sense. I don't know if the Canadian government is even taking the situation seriously. I don't know if they have proper advisors in the matters of Latin America, but it seems to me that for them it's not really important. So I don't know what he's doing, to be honest.
Okay, so let us encourage our federal representatives, call them up, write them a note saying, let's condemn that regime in Venezuela. Like, let's get, like, this is, if you care about human rights and our economy, and it's also related to this world of criminal activity, we should be all over this, shouldn't we, Anna?
Absolutely. And let's remember that in this case, what is very important is not only to say like, oh, we believe that the electoral process was irregular and all that. No, it's about also recognizing the person that won. And in this case, it's Edmundo Gonzalez. And that's something that Chile has done. That's something that the United States has done. That's something that Peru has done. Why is Canada not following that path? Why hasn't Canada recognized the actual winner of the election and it's aligned with these governments like Mexico, Colombia, and Brazil? It doesn't make sense.
Okay, so we do have a measure of influence, so let's use it wisely. So I think that's a really good call to action today. So we've talked. We've peeled the onion here, and I think rather successfully, about the story of Venezuela, the tragedy of it, and we certainly want to see a peaceful resolution that justly serves the people of Venezuela. But in the meantime, I think there's some very powerful lessons here for Canada. We've certainly alluded to them during our discussion. And frankly, I think that's overwhelming. And I'm not suggesting that Canada is Venezuela, but are there obvious lessons to be learned here that can be applied to this country, Anna?
Well, you know that you mentioned something like Kamala Harris calling for price controls. I have seen Jacqueline Sim doing the same thing in Canada. And, price controls, when they were imposed in my country, it only worsened the situation, because no one is going to make something or work or put their labor in something that will tell you like, oh, you cannot make profit from it. because people work for profit. That's the reality. That's the incentive behind most of humans. So what you do is that you actually production goes down, and if production goes down, you're gonna get less supplies of things. By default, everything will come more expensive. So I don't think people like Jasmine saying are stupid. They know what they're doing. They know what it leads to. And Canadians should know too. Like they are playing with your emotions. They want to play the good guy, but in reality, this type of measure doesn't work. So when we see things like this, Canadians need to be very aware because that's a sign. Or for example, when the prime minister comes and say, "Oh, I just want to make sure that everyone is contributing their fair share," and they impose a capital gains tax, it's like, what is the fair share? Why people shouldn't be able to be entitled to the product of their work that is the money they create? So this type of language, as I mentioned during the interview, matters. Pay attention to the language, pay attention to the terms they use, because that is a sign of populism.
Okay, so I like what you're saying, Anna, that we need to be aware, as Michael says in the chat, that Canadians need to be aware of the use of language under populist disguise to basically mislead people into policies that will give them more control, the government more control, a bigger government, but that will actually make your life unlivable.
Exactly. They will make you less free in the end of the day. Like I said before, freedom is like really something that you need to fight for. Nothing is given for free. There's nothing really free. You're paying somehow, and sometimes that cost might be your own liberties.
The invocation of the Emergency Measures Act in Canada, in effect martial law in this country a number of years ago, was a profound act in Canada. Do you think that, and was seen to be as unlawful, it was ruled as unlawful, and yet the federal government, even before the decision was really digested, immediately said it was going to be appealed. Is that, again, another kind of similar example where the government will cavalierly play with our rights and freedoms as a way to control the population? Is that, again, a similar parallel to Venezuela?
Absolutely, because in the end of the day, that was abuse of power in display. If you think about it, what was Emergency Act? Wasn't that called the War Act in the past? It's for something that involves extraordinary circumstances. I live in Ottawa. I live very close to Parliament. I saw the protests myself.
Oh, you did?
Almost every day, yes. And let me tell you, I didn't see anything that implied that the government needed that level of power. It wasn't a violent protest. They were not destroying property, either public or private, in the process. These are people that didn't deserve the treatment that the government gave to them. And I saw this with my own eyes, like no one told me. And if you see some people living in downtown Ottawa, they could even agree with me. Like I have talked to business owners, spoken to them, and they were like, this opened my eyes because the government treated them like criminals. And this is a clear example that decision was completely unjustified. It was horrifying that we saw that happening in Canada, because that is only to be used in circumstances of extreme circumstances. It reminds me when in Roman law they had the figure of the dictator, and in Roman law the figure of the dictator is supposed to be someone that was going to act in cases of extreme need. And this is what the Emergency Act is resembles to. This wasn't a situation of extreme need. This was just abuse of power.
I think you're right on, Anna. And I think also there's so many references that you've made, Anna, regarding the story of Venezuela that are so relevant and apropos to Canada. And I think of even the whole references to the control of schools and almost the assumption that your children are not your children as parents, but rather are the property of the state. Was that the similar attitude that came into bearing in Venezuela then?
Well, in Venezuela, they went above and beyond. Actually, this week, They just sent a group of minors, a group of teenagers, to re-education camps that are literally prisons that they made for minors in Venezuela. And I saw horrifying videos of parents seeing their children being taken by the government, just waving at them and saying, "My son, I love you." Like, imagine how heartbreaking is that you're seeing your child being taken for what? Posting something on Instagram, protesting peacefully in
Wow.
the street, wanting
That
a
is
better
outrageous.
country. It is horrible. So they start with education, you end up with situations of re-education camps. That that is, I don't understand how this is happening in our continent in the 21st century. This is unacceptable.
Unacceptable is right. I think in Canada as well, we notice that in all these kinds of lessons of history, when it comes to tyranny, they go after freedom of speech. And in this country, we've seen a lot of powerful example. We have the so-called Online Safe Harms Act, where again, it's about your safety. And of course, the government says it's about misinformation, when in fact, it's about spitting out their misinformation. We have a really bizarre situation. They're even proposing a digital safety czar, basically a commission that would go after online postings, just like you talked about. So is that a parallel in your mind as well, Anna?
Of course, like, look, in Venezuela right now, they're sentencing people for incitement to hatred. How many times the government doesn't use the term hate speech here in Canada?
Mm-hmm. Yes,
And
it's
they,
hate speech.
it's hate speech
Yeah.
because for them, hate speech is incitement to hatred. Right
Yes.
now, political prisoners in Venezuela are having two charges against them: terrorism and incitement to hatred.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the same handbook of governments who want to expand their power. They think that, oh, it's for your greater good. No, like, the problem with the government in these situations is that they believe they know what is better for the individual, when the reality, we are capable of critical thinking. If I believe that something is hateful, I should have the power and the decision to be like, I don't want to see this. Actually, if I know that a person is being hateful, even better, because I know that I want to, leave that person behind. I don't want to be with someone like that. But under these kind of laws, what they're imposing is censorship in the end of the day. If someone is hateful towards, I don't know, Latin people, for example, they're going to continue being hateful despite you put a law or no. The only difference is that I will not be able to tell if the person
Yeah,
actually dislikes me.
that's right on. Yeah, so it's not enough to just simply censor someone because you are offended by it. We need healthy debate and discussion more than ever as we are on this path together to debate and seek the truth. I mean, that's one of the brilliant parts of our free and democratic society. So how dare, to coin the phrase from Greta Thunberg, um, how dare they interfere with our ability to have that kind of healthy discussion? I mean, it's really absurdly ridiculous. So we've got to really speak up about that. So as we close out our conversation today, Anna, and it's been a real pleasure, and the audience has been so helpful in terms of this discussion as well, and I want to thank them. What is there a key lesson to be learned from this, from your perspective, Anna, as we reflect on the story of Venezuela?
I think I said a lot of things during the conversation. And again, I'm very thankful for this opportunity. I think that in the end, it comes down that we need to pay attention to the signs in their early stage. Like, we need to pay attention to things like language. We need to pay attention to policy making. Actually, is very important, and that we cannot wait until things get really bad to do something about it. Canadians, and in this I include myself because I'm a Canadian citizen too now. I think we need to leave apathy behind. I think we need to start to see politics as the way it is. That is something that, we like or not, is going to impact our lives. Many Canadians, I think that they are like, no, I don't want to talk about politics because it's problematic. No, we need to make politics unproblematic. We need to unpack that, and we need to discuss it in a way that is civil, in a way that everyone respect each other opinion without censorship and being able to get engaged in society. I remember that I saw Jordan Peterson not so long ago in Ottawa, I think it was last year, and he said something like every spot that you leave behind, let's say, I don't know, a trustee in the education board, things like that, like every space that you don't want to get involved, someone else will do it. And maybe that person who does it won't have the same opinions or the same ideas and won't be as democratic as you are, for example. So we need to be engaged in our politics, to be engaged in our society, and to be the change that we want to see in our country.
Well said, Anna. Anna Rizo, I want to thank you so much for joining us in today's conversation and wish you and the entire team at Ladies of Liberty all the very best.
Thank you so much, David.
Well, that brings to a close our conversation today with Anna Rizo, the president of Ladies of Liberty Canada. I hope you've appreciated this conversation. And it strikes me that as we talk about Venezuela, we talk about the story not only of an incredible people of courage and commitment, we certainly stand with them as they seek freedom and justice in their country. And that is a powerful lesson for Canada, this country, and that it is a warning to us that we cannot take our freedom and liberty for granted, and that we should ground, as Anna said, our conversations not only about what is good public policy, but what is the realization that every human being should be treated with respect and that is created in the image of the divine and that life is sacred. I believe that we would do well to remember the words of Hannah Arendt, the great political theorist, and really who literally wrote a book about the nature of totalitarianism, that normal people do not know what is possible. And I think what Arendt really meant was it is remarkable what can happen when we do not realize that if the government does not have checks and balances on it, it is truly stunningly evil what people can do in the name of power. So let us remember those lessons as we go forward. And I want to again thank you all for joining us here on this discussion on Leaders on the Frontier. And be sure to join us next Thursday at the same time and place.